Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday, May 31st, another node operator roundtable, and we'll hand it over straight to Brian to kick things off.
Yes, thanks. It's a light week. I don't have prepared topics or anything to review this week, so I want to go straight into sort of an open floor. If there's any urgent issues or simply topics of interest that people would like to go into this week or in a future week, it could just be something that we're not ready to talk about now, but can capture and get our ducks in a row to discuss in a future session. So with that, open floor. If anybody would like to speak up with topics that they want to cover, please do so.
Is there still interest for BPs to work on or to deploy infrastructure for EOS EVM? And do we have any updates on the previous conversations about it?
Yeah, I can give kind of a non-update almost, which is that it's still a topic of discussion. I think in an abstract sense there's interest, but we're not at a point where we're ready to move forward with asking for people to do that. So or really for that matter, having all the materials ready that would make it easy for you to do so. I see that Ted.
I think the material is already there. Like I kind of looked at it. It's pretty straightforward. Like we said, it's just proxy, different segments of RPCs that respond to certain queries. It's more about I think what Matthew raised at the time, what is the incentive for them to run it, and what part is the one that actually needs running, and some of the issues I foresee with it, how that might be handled, which is effectively the RAM issue, and limiting the gas fee so the TX wrapper can't just unanimously decide a super high gas fee and smart contract lets it through.
Right. So I'm not really prepared for that discussion today, but would it be fair to say that that's a topic of interest for you to continue discussing in the future?
Yeah, for sure.
I'll second it because I'll probably be running it.
And I guess one more thing to add to this one is more like, what is the role of ENF as operator and then the BP as operator? So let's say if a BP wants to operate as in the EOS EVM node, but there is no transactions getting relayed to their operation, then they're never going to get any rewards. So maybe there is sort of a role where ENF can play as the load balancer for all the BP operators, and then the operators just operate as one or many nodes. So maybe we kind of explore that sort of a hierarchy of transaction dispatching from the global ENF load balancer, if there is one.
Right.
Yeah, there has to be one if you want to have a good user experience, because people try, like I was seeing some people commenting like, oh, I tried to push my contract here, and like the answer is, oh, just try this other endpoint and delete from MetaMask your old. This is obviously not a good user experience. You want to have like a unified proxy that is sitting at ENF or supported by ENF, and then some type of status or checking system against all the other providers that sit behind this proxy to decide who stays in the proxy, as well as how to rotate that proxy. Yeah, then when they get to that proxy, there's already the JSON RPC is already itself another proxy. So it depends where you actually want to proxy out to the API. Do you want to proxy out at the main kind of endpoint, or do you want to proxy out only say the TX wrapper transactions, or the one that requires ship, like the actual kind of node itself? All these will have different costs for the API provider, as well as different abilities or ways to do it.
I missed the beginning part of this conversation. Is the TLDR asking how, kind of the RPC node strategy, whether it's going to be decentralized as the focus or centralized essentially?
Yeah, so hang on, backing up. Yes, I'll get to that in a second. Backing up, the broader focus is just open floor. Shaq raised this as something of interest. Yeah, but the question broadly is there interest in EOS block producers running EOS EVM nodes in the future? And then questions around decentralization, incentives, the role of ENF versus BPs, et cetera, right?
So I guess I kind of will touch on everything and give the general strategy. So as the ENF, we're the ones running the RPC node, and that is, the intent is to have a centralized body running this, not encourage decentralization of this. What I mean by that is we're currently doing it, but we are working towards being able to identify a stakeholder that would take this on. So think of, for example, partnering with Infura or partnering with Alchemy. And so it's a very centralized approach to providing the RPC node. We've seen that is what is successful in other ecosystems. The users are comfortable with that. There's an SLA, you deal with one, and the uptime is quite high and it's more performant. We will, as the ENF, provide kind of an MVP documentation / how-to, so that if people want to run their own EVMs for testing purposes or for whatever it is they want to run their own EVM RPC nodes, they will be able to do so with documentation we provide, but we're not going down that path of enabling that so much, as in deploying a lot of resources to ensure that the RPCs are load balanced and that, hey, we point to all these different ones. It's the opposite. We're going to be pointing to one. Essentially, right now, by default, it's us. In the future, ideally, would be something like Infura. So we're not working on a, let's say, a framework that down the line, the idea will be to have multiple RPC node providers. It's the complete opposite of that.
But at the end of the day, there are going to be multiple RPC node providers. It's just that, for example, they'll all be controlled by that central entity, because you're obviously going to have redundancy and like other things across your own centralized infrastructure.
If we appoint Infura, for example, so nobody stops anybody from doing it if they want. But let's say the endpoint that we point to, that the ENF says, please point to this, is run by Infura. How they do that is on their end. But the idea is we're not going to incentivize, here's the Infura API endpoint, here's the other BP API.
Yeah, you're not going to build Infura, basically.
No, we're just going to essentially partner with them is the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a completely different model than if we wanted to say, hey, everybody, run a node. We're going to encourage people to run nodes. We're going to run the framework around that. We're going to help load balance. We're going to have a website where you can have all the different API endpoints and you can connect. We're not going down that road.
No, having different endpoints is just bad user experience. The idea was always one endpoint, like we discussed in a previous call, how it's that one endpoint that will be, say, ENF controlled, and then that could have its own health checks against other decentralized endpoints, and it manages the proxying. But I understand now, at least, like the actual plan.
And it really,
I guess the other
resources to create this framework of, let's say, decentralized nodes is extremely, labor intensive in terms of the deployment of resources. So not just financial, but actual people creating this, setting this up, having the marketing alongside this so that people know where to go. We don't have the ability to do both. Basically, we can't create a partnership with something like Infura while also creating a framework around having it decentralized and supporting that, leveraging that. We're choosing that route.
Yeah, the domain's got to go one way, one place.
Yeah.
Cool. So, but then, as we said, like technically, I can run my own, node, my own old JSON RPC infrastructure that talks to the same, smart contract, charge whatever fee I want, and provide my own, say, user experience for the user.
Correct. Yeah. But then, so the ENF in that case will provide you with base documentation so that you can do it yourself. but it's not going to create a whole framework around that to help amplify your service, essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, basically, you're not going to be involved in any of the benefits of the marketing or people getting to be aware of your endpoint in the first place. That would be up on the person.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen through dApps where they've got a particular application, they've got a particular service, they want to ensure that the uptime to access their particular application is in a way controlled by them. So they also offer an RPC endpoint. And then to those users, that is the choice that they make. And so obviously anybody can do whatever they want. That's the beauty of this. And if the users end up valuing that particular process more, then they're going to be willing to pay a premium for that in particular.
Yeah, it's just like long term, it's a bit of a bad kind of UX when people, there's nothing you can do about it, but I mean, it's bad UX when people run their own nodes and then program it. So when you go to their site, it switches and adds the network to your MetaMask, because then you'll end up with a lot of like EOS EVM like chains in your MetaMask, because MetaMask will allow you to add them. And kind of like not great for the end user, but really there's nothing that can be done about that.
That's why we're moving as quickly as possible to set up a partnership with something like Infura or Alchemy. While in the meantime, we're running the nodes, and so we're just pointing again people to one.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess we were asking also in the last call, what do you see as the vision? Or they were asking like us in general, or people, creators, or people involved in part, what's the vision of EOS EVM? Is it to, for example, make it like an easy path for existing Ethereum users or EVM users to come and get a benefit right away of what Antelope has to offer in terms of cheaper resources and everything else, and then slowly try to once they reach certain limits or inefficiencies within EOS EVM, try to migrate some of that code base slowly into native EOS. Is that the idea, or is it you think it's more like?
I would think that's less of a priority. And I think the first part of what you said is accurate. What we're doing here is that the EVM itself, the underlying engine, so to speak, is still EOS. Right, and so you're able to think of the EVM as a super SDK. A lot of the things are abstracted away from you as a developer if you go through EVM, and that applies, I think, to a particular subset of developers that are either running on Ethereum or they're running on EVM compatible chains. So for them, it's giving access to EOS as the engine through, let's say, EVM, the SDK. So the world that they're aware of, let's say the car chassis that they're coming in, the doors, the window, the steering wheel, everything, all familiar to them. The engine now is EOS in the background. I would say less so the second part of what you said, which is then, but the real idea is to get them to just build all on the EOS. I think in parallel to what's happening with the EVM, native development usability is still, it's still underway. People are still building this. We're still building this. But to catch up to this idea of the chassis, kind of the window too, of what EVM world has created, it's going to take a really long time. So the idea is not in a very short period of time, get people to start leveraging native EOS. It's going to be to continue using EVM. While in the meantime, EOS as a native stack, it does build those extra libraries and all those functions, etc. But that's took I guess Ethereum 7 years to get to where they are today with all the capital they had, with all the history. So it will take us quite some time to be able to replicate that. That's not happening anytime soon. So they're completely separate. I would say the focus is to get people to come into the EVM because it abstracts away a lot of the difficulties of blockchain. And so they can just get up and running. Yeah, it's just basically they can get up and running very, very quickly. One of the big things we've heard a lot is people saying, there are libraries out there, they're already audited. They come on the native side, they're like, oh, I need to build my own road. I need to build my own, basically the own streets, build everything from scratch. And I've got very little support. Well, now you're able to just fast forward all of that, come through this space. at a much lower cost, even auditing costs, etc. So just the from 0 to 1 is much, much, much faster on this side. At the same time, though, for those who require the fine tuning, which I'm not convinced is many people right now, they would keep going on the native from the beginning side. And there are already applications running on this, and there's some that will justify doing that, and there are others that will justify, I just want to skip the line. This is good enough for what I'm looking for, and we're just encouraging you to come through this door.
And for sure, and any metrics that EOS EVM gets, like the TVL or anything else, is obviously a benefit for
direct benefit to EOS.
It's locked inside EOS.
Correct. Yeah, and the more usage, so what we've seen as well is within a short period of time, the usage of EOS native in terms of tokens that it's locking up, or I guess financial metrics, is almost a 1-for-1 with EVM already very early on. So the amount of EOS tokens that are being locked up within the EVM smart contract are almost 1-for-1 if you can, if you make some comparisons to the amount that is locked up in Rex, let's say on a daily basis, because it's so much easier on this side. And the idea is that the more people come through this door, the more EOS it's going to lock up. One of them is it's locked up and then it's distributed to users that do certain actions. The other one is it's locked up and it's taken out of circulation, so everybody gets the benefit from it. So it's just two different mechanisms. But we've seen that very early on, there are already tons of people walking in through this door.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Cool, I guess, and maybe from a kind of go back to your question of a node operator, I think you guys are more than node operators. There are also gateways into EOS. So people likely reach out to you, hey, I want to build something, or I've got an application, where you're in a way gateway, like a filter to help people choose where to deploy or how to deploy, etc. I would say that sending people the EVM route has a much lower cost if that is a factor. And the amount of capital that's available on both sides just goes far longer on the EVM than on native, because a lot of the cost can be abstracted away. So we see from even let's say a grant framework perspective, the grant size requests for people coming through the EVM is much lower than on the native side. And so we're able to effectively give out more to more different teams than we are on the EVM side. And then those teams are able to deploy quicker and come to market much, 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 much faster than on the native side. So as node operators, I think that is an opportunity for you guys, is if people are reaching out and saying, I want to deploy an EOS, I want whatever XYZ, here's what I'm trying to build, actually sending them through the EVM way might be the better case for some, because their cost will be lower, time to deployment will be faster, and EOS still benefits in the end, depending on what their requirements are. So if they're, if you deem that the requirements, okay, you need to build on native, here's why, you give them that option. Depending on if they already have community or what their requirements are, sending them to EVM is a pretty good solution too. Either way, in the end, it's all building on EOS.
Yeah, just the user experience of the EVM stuff needs a little work.
I mean, that applies as well to native. So yes, it's just different kind of work. Yes, one of them though is a catch up, and it's a little bit more within our control. Versus native, yes, it is under our control, but we're talking about much longer timelines, and a lot of it is not under our control.
Yeah.
So I think it just opens a new door for you as well. It opens up new possibilities.
My concern is if it's actually very successful, I think that's when the problems come. Like, the big problem. Well, the first problem I raised, right? Like the RAM issue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't see that being addressed in the EOS EVM. But currently, it's the contract that pays for the RAM,
mm-hmm.
and in turn raises the price for all users, because it just adjusts the gas value in the global table of the EOS EVM contract. So, like, once people use it, and then once people find out about this, so they might just abuse it and create like 1 million contracts. Like, I'm not aware if there's any limitations now, other than the contract owning the RAM and can unilaterally decide to delete or free up RAM. But that also obviously, as you know, has consequences if people have things attached to it. And so that part, I don't know like how that might be handled down the line, as well as putting limitations, as we mentioned, in the smart contract to enforce that gas fee, right? So the TX wrapper node doesn't just say, I'm going to charge 100x and have users like, get screwed over by a bad, operator, for example.
All good points. Those are things that I think whether or not they will be addressed or what the I guess direction is there will be determined over time in a way. Right now, there are base level problems that are, I guess, higher in priority to address versus at some point we're going to have millions of users. If we get to millions of users and we've got so much RAM usage, etc., in a way, it's one of the good problems to have. At the same time, though, because we see what's happened in the past with ADOS on the EOS or WAX currently with the RAM requirements, so we're still putting efforts and resources into that, but in a way, it's lower priority in the time span than other things are. Right now, the focus is on addressing the demand, actually getting more demand in. You're right, though, that in time, certain components will need to be optimized to ensure that this is sustainable. We're nowhere near there yet. One of the things I don't want to repeat with EOS that I think we did very poorly in the past is attempting to close doors before people even walk in out of fear of what might happen, instead of just embracing and then adapting and living with those realities and making that conscious decision of, yes, that means maybe things will go more expensive, or yes, there might be more cost on certain stakeholders, but not shutting down those doors, essentially. So I think we do have work to do on that front with resources specifically, but in the short term, that's very low priority.
Yeah, I don't think it's a factor in the short term, like I said. But yeah, so the focus is more going to be on the whole point of it, really, the short term point at least, or even the long term point, which is like to onboard users. So I gather the majority of the work is to make sure everything is super smooth, super reliable, and probably more tooling in terms of user experience for people to bridge to do this and so on and so on.
We definitely have the opposite problem in EOS compared to other chains, where we have way more supply than there is. I think that applies to a lot of blockchains, but the engine that we have at the base is extremely powerful. We've got plenty of time before we're stressing out that engine. And so right now, the focus is on getting people to use that engine, not trying to optimize that engine further to even ever increase the supply without ever attempting to address demand. And EVM really is attempting to address that demand, right? It's lowering the barrier to entry. And then it's a give and take. Then it becomes kind of a pendulum of, you need to be able to grow sustainably, but you can't provide too much supply without letting the demand come in, because that's what we've had historically, just very little demand with unlimited supply. And then when the demand came in, the reaction was, no, let's stop everything, which is kind of what ADOS did. And then ultimately what that did is it lost a business opportunity that went elsewhere, which actually created a lot of value elsewhere. Whether or not it was value for everybody, that's debatable. But I think the way in which we address situations in the future should be cognizant that it's always a give and take with supply and demand. You want to try to keep as much balance as possible. And right now the balance is definitely odd. Yeah, of course. And so for example, Guillaume, I don't know if Guillaume is on this call, Shaq, but we've been talking about the resource in general, right? Because UX has a completely different resource model, and it's essentially learned from EOS and made things completely differently. Whether or not EOS goes in that direction in the future, or how we potentially bring back up the topic of RAM and RAM output, a lot of that I think is also up to the BPs, their role within this. And so a few people have reached out to the NF about RAM in particular, and what they see as what are we doing now, but what are we doing in the future? How we know it's going to be an issue in the future. How are we going to handle that, or which direction we're going? That is a discussion I think that's important for the BPs to have. That's less on the ENF. if the BPs coordinate and they want to lead something and then they want the support of BNF, I think that that's really good. But I think that is better suited in the hands of the BPs to champion a particular direction and then to seek help from the network to come in and either go in that direction or not. Right now, there's just too many different files, too many different priorities, and I would say that's less important in the short term. Not saying it's not important at all, but that's one where I think the node operators have really good insights because you're running the machines in the background. So I even talked with Aaron from Greymass, for example. A lot of the BPs right now are running legacy gaming machines for some of their nodes, like i9s in particular. And the benefit to performance, yes, Michael, the benefit to performance versus, let's say, a new Xeon right now that has more cores that are being unused, but then it has ECC memory. Is that a direction we want to incentivize in the future? Because we see that it is potentially causing problems, but it's not right now because there are other problems before that that are likely issues before we even get to that being a problem. But those, I think, are the discussions that the BPs can have in terms of right now we've got the luxury of having, in a way more supply than demand. That ideally won't be the case forever. Where are potential optimizations that we would want to focus on in the future? That's a discussion entirely. I think that this group would be well suited to have, and then to propose something and champion a particular direction, leveraging the work that other chains, for example, UX in this particular case for resources, have gone down.
I'm all for i9s, but with ECC, which now I think like you can get just like until that finally doesn't lock it down.
Yeah. And then kind of the reality as well of I guess one of the really important things for us when I reach out to other investors or stakeholders is right now EOS unarguably has that reliability in the back end. EOS has been running for over 1,800 days nonstop, literally zero downtime. That is, I think, the most important job of the BPs. Remove everything else. You can never go on camera. You can just be completely, not present for everything else. If at least your nodes are running 100% of the time, that is the most important job that you can do in the network, is ensure that network reliability, that network stability, because that's something that very few networks are able to claim, especially the ones that we're competing against, the ones that, very highly scalable, low cost performance. Yeah. This is something that EOS just trumps everybody over. I mean, there's no competition out there like EOS or like Antelope basically at the base.
I think nobody's in disagreement about the tech stack, right? Like we're all here for that reason.
And so that would be the most important one, is like keep doing that. I think is the most, everything else is bonus on top of that at this stage.
So that's it for me with that topic. If you guys want to move on to another topic.
All right. Well, thank you for digging into that topic, and Eve for jumping in and providing your insights there. Does anybody else have any topics that they would like to discuss either in this session or in a future session?
I'll second that non-ECC RAM is painful whenever you've got chain base that likes to rip on it. So.
Yeah, I think that relates to some of the discussion we had recently about requirements around state minimizing disk IO and whatnot. I mean, I guess you're talking about RAM, so it's not a direct relationship.
It's the other side of it.
Yeah, it's the other side.
It's what results as the massive state database. And
yeah,
there was even, I think, a topic about the pruning or more efficient use of, like, does Wax need a 95 gig database smashed into RAM? But anyway, yes, there's a whole rabbit hole of performance and optimizations, and i9's outrunning all the rest of them and causing this massive disparage between the Xeons that are validating versus the i9 hot rods. People think faster is better, and it's like, actually not. You're starting to counterproductive impact
The
it.
same is better. You know, you don't want to like produce blocks and then gets dropped by like half the network because you can't keep up, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, even just the building side of it, you know, people have nice i-end i9 or Xeons signing at 0.2 of a second, and then you bring in these. I'm waiting for the 14th gen i9s to drop so I can see, how fast can you really rip a calculation? And I bet you it's going to be a third of the speed. So you really get even acceptable, good, decent hardware. You can get a pretty broad range. Anyway,
It only affects billing, like, and they're still able to verify the other BPs and whatnot. Then people will, you know, once you get more adoption and people have like heavy things to run, like say proofs or any of this stuff, they're gonna time it. Like I was doing with caching up with proofs when it's, you know, certain BPs in certain chains, which there was a big disparity between their performance, so that I pay less in resource costs when I'm like
you're actually
stuff.
you're intentionally targeting the BP to catch their rounds. Yeah, we thank you for that.
So, to inform my naivety, what is it about i9s that you're looking forward to specifically?
Super fast single thread performance.
Yeah, the i9s, you know, are what I try to describe to folks. I mean, they're a desktop, you know, non-server class proc, but they're designed for like gaming machines, which need just a few cores, really as fast as you can possibly get them, versus a Xeon, which has, you know, 64 different cores, and Node OS is single threaded on, you know, its most critical applications, although that's getting better. What that also results in, the i9, technically, the chipset only really supports up to 128 gigs of RAM. Now, supposedly you can go higher. I think some people said 192, but I mean, you really got to push it and go outside of the specs. And here we are running nodes that on boot, bare minimum, really require 95 gigs worth of RAM, and it ain't getting much smaller. So you're going to surpass the amount of physical memory that a whole tier of, it ain't just i9. I mean, there's a lot of Xeons that.
Well, potentially. What we don't know is that maybe new architecture in the future will make it that i9s can support 256 base, and then you've pushed back the problem now for a very long time.
Correct. I'm not
But
saying
the ECC component is still one of the issues.
correct. More explaining to why the i9. I mean, we reference i9s, but we think of them as servers. But yes, that it's intentionally designed to not have that scale of
Fast single clock.
Yeah.
But then we're also seeing that catch up, right? So depending on which i9s people are running, if they're running them at 5 gigahertz for single core, well, now you get 4.5 gigahertz Xeon. So then the delta is pretty small, but one, you can accommodate more RAM, and it's ECC RAM. So like, it's a game of cat and mouse continues.
What then happens with that is that you go to the 14th gen i9s, we'll call it. And what now ends up happening is that is signing blocks. I mean, Moore's law destroys the mathematics, is that my i9s, which are only a year and a half old, will be signing at 4 times probably as slow as these 14th gen. So you address one issue, and it's
well, this is already resolved. Like I was saying earlier, like that the i9s, the later i9s support ECC already. That's what I was saying. Intel no longer blocks it. I don't know if it's full support, but if you go on their,
you're talking about just the DDR, that the on-chain. Where's Aaron? Aaron's always the advocate that says, that's not really DDR. DDR5 doesn't truly have ECC on chip like they tout it for, but it is getting better. But Kevin can attest, man, I have seen crazy weird issues with these i9s and non-ECC, and
But what it is ECC. That's the thing, is it might be something prior to even ECC being relevant. Because there are other issues right now with software, with hardware in general, or relays, for example, that are just not as strong. So it gets dropped not because, or there's an issue, maybe not even because of ECC yet.
Yeah, no. My issue, right? I mean, I'm the hardware provider node. I send Evan likes to respond back with either the chain's extremely broken or your shit's extremely broken. More likely.
Most likely that, yes.
So, but it does, because I push things so hard, because I run so much, but not even it ain't an internet connection over. It truly is, holy shit. Chain-based came back with something completely different than what it expected, i.e. your memory's whacked, and it just tumbles over itself and whatever. But sorry, Brian, to explain why the I9s kind of get called out. They're the fastest single thread you can get, but they have their inherent limitations in compared to true server enterprise class server.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. All right. Are there other topics that we should capture for a future session?
Is Node EOS 4.0.1 considered like bug-free and people should start updating?
No bug.
I get that thumbs up from Kevin.
I'll always hesitate to give any guarantees. But having said that, it's, the changes in 4.0.1 are minimal and specifically are bug fixes. So it's certainly more bug-free than versions that preceded it.
Never say certainly, because when you fix bugs,
Yeah.
you know what.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
More
likely than not.
One of the bug fixes was that like shutting itself down. So, yeah, hopefully that's.
It did shut itself down without a dirty DB.
It was graceful. Hey, I got to give you credit on that. That's
Fine. So,
but you should pray for that.
I mean, we certainly hope so. Certainly let us know if not, and we'll get a 4.02 out if need be, right? So, yeah, I mean, 4.0 is certainly where we want people to be moving forward. So as you can, please do upgrade from your 3.2 stack to your 4.0 stack. There's a lot of cool new stuff in there. Hopefully you take advantage of it and give us feedback.
Especially if you run Xeons with like a ton of cores you're unable to use, you can finally use them now.
Yeah, that's right. The multi-threaded read capability is kind of exciting. I'd love to hear feedback on like how many fewer API nodes do you need to run now with the 4.0 stack as opposed to the 3.2 stack?
Yeah.
All right. I think last call for other topics.
I could talk about a bunch of things.
well, this is the time to do it.
I mean, I guess next question on that train of thought is, where are we at with managing of the state and just its monstrous workarounds that it incurs, TempFS,
right,
heavy ECC, things like that.
I mean, it's an area of active discussion and exploration. Proposals are kind of being put together right now for that. It's one of those things where there's a lot of ways that we could go, but the way that those approaches interact with potential futures, right, are pretty complex. And so what looks like an optimization today could create a barrier to some other more important change in the future. Like as an example, if we go in the direction of some kind of state sharding, that is sort of what's the word I'm looking for? That is incompatible with some things that would be really effective optimizations with how it works today, right? So, but So it's not something where there's just like an obvious approach, and that's why we aren't. There's still a lot of active discussion, but we will definitely. This will be a forum where we come to discuss those proposals as they become solidified enough to discuss for feedback and whatnot.
And Karki, Michael, are you concerned about that mainly for WAX, or is there something about EOS or?
Well, like I say, I mean, WAX tended to bring it to light just because it kind of took off. And I mean, there was the, run on accounts, but it sounds like, I mean, even contracts itself, really kind of caused it. And being involved with so many other chains that utilize the technology, either publicly or privately, even ones that are talking about, oh, we're going to get millions and millions of accounts, and run it. Well, do you understand, every one of those is going to take 4K and, they never go away. And just some of that inherent, just utilizing the underlying technology for even a lot of the other projects. I don't want to say I'm concerned. I just try to, hey, might be something to think about, because at this point, you drop 10 million accounts out there, that 16 gig node, I don't know the exact math, but you may change the state of things pretty quick and not even realize it. So that's why I just bring it up. Yes, obviously it's a pain.
But I think if somebody's bringing in 10 million nodes now, like obviously it's easier in hindsight, but there's other ways to do that without using the 4 kilobytes of RAM, and then force users to pay for that RAM if they eventually want to upgrade their whatever.
Correct. That's what I was saying. I'm not the cook that tells them what recipe to do. I try to just be the mechanic to be like, yo, you realize your wheel's falling off. You should do something about that. Or
but at some point you got to decide to build for the future, or to decide to build for, the problems that happened in the past, right? Because there's different solutions. If we're trying to, spend a lot of energy into worrying about, some additional state optimizations that would really take away from maybe other improvements that would benefit chains that didn't necessarily run into this issue, and have ways to mitigate that issue in the future, it might not be the best focus on time, in general.
Mm-hmm. Sure, totally open to, I know there's bigger fish to fry. That was a question that, with no other topics presented, I was curious on, because of those reasons. Yes, it's painful on WAX, but it's not only just the WAX in the current state. As I mentioned this to some of the other chains, most of them aren't as familiar and intimate with the technology as we are, and don't realize that might have.
Yeah, because now with other methods that are, people are, starting to use, as well as the ability of having, IBC and eventually faster finality, now these chains can scale in different ways than the only way kind of we had, or the most straightforward way that was used, say, in WAX's case. So I'm all about, in general, if we talk about the tech stack is about improving it mainly for the future, and to make it easier, obviously, for the past chains as well. But just to optimize state and figure out what shard is going to go where and which gets loaded and which, you're talking about really some very high level development that is not guaranteed to necessarily get the outcome that's beneficial for everybody involved. So it's I don't know, it's something to consider.
You mean in terms of developer ease? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I mean to accomplish actually, say, making some big optimization to the state where it's moved into shards, as you were saying, that will have to be loaded in and out of RAM, and things of the sort. This is you're gonna make compromises that not everybody will be happy with, depending on their use case, and it doesn't. And there's, I think, better solutions now that we have IBC and other ways to potentially create accounts on contracts, and that will eliminate 90% of the user that just came in through a free account and didn't want to spend any money, but he's just there living in your RAM forever.
Yeah, as a clarification, I should have stated this more clearly in the first place, but sharding I mentioned as a hypothetical example, not as a clear item.
Yeah, I don't mean to like hold that word like or the detail, but my point is any work on that part is very high level work. It takes a lot of time, energy, and testing, and it's just talking about like really the opportunity cost of what could be done instead of that, and then we can compare, for example.
Greg, I definitely have there's some creative solutions to it. I guess my point is that there are going to be several projects that are going to stumble exactly into what Wax learned, because that layer one does have some inherent quirks, and you need to probably think about it from a layer two. But that was really where it came from, is that it's very heavy on RAM. And I mean, for the same argument, you can't spin up a local dev node on an EOS chain without having a pretty decent amount of RAM, because it's throwing a bunch of crap in there that you don't need, much less Wax. I mean, so you're right. Definitely not. I'd love to see instant finality long before I see a trimmed state. We can keep throwing hardware at it. But it's not to say, I mean, that's definitely there. And a lot of the people that are utilizing the technology don't really see that. And I think we'll do exactly like Wax did, to kind of stumble into it the hard way. But if it had a native solution that didn't make it so painful, maybe you're okay giving away 10,000 accounts a day and just dealing with it.
Yeah, given limited time and resources, it becomes an exercise in theory of constraints, right? Like there's only one action that's going to remove a limitation and increase, whatever metric it is that you're considering most important, right? So, ability to scale state will become that thing.
Well, I think Shaq makes a lot of good points there, right? I mean, it's the typical computer science trade-off between, memory and performance. Like, we've discussed in the past things like ability to get some multi-threaded capability. One way of doing that is to effectively double your RAM requirement, where you effectively make a copy of your entire RAM that you can use while you're updating the other RAM. Now, out of the gate, that doubles your RAM requirement. For a chain like Wax, that's pretty, not great, right? So there's certainly trade-offs to be discussed and talked about in terms of like, where do you head and what sort of features are you looking at? I mean, that said, I mean, there is work afoot to look at reducing RAM requirements, and I anticipate that will that will bear some sort of fruit. At this point, we'll see where that heads and what it realizes into. But yeah, there's always going to be the trade-off there in terms of like, where do we want to head with performance? Some of the things that I'd like to see us tackle going forward is multi-threaded transaction execution, right? And those sorts of things are possible. A lot of those do require potentially additional RAM requirements. Now, there's ways I think that we can mitigate against that by looking at layer of usage of RAM, whether it's hot or cold or those sorts of things, in terms of layering that up and hopefully try to get a little bit of the best of the both worlds, or at least trade-offs in both directions to get you where we'd like to be eventually.
Oh, that's great. The multi-threading and transactions, that would be open a lot of doors, especially if, at the time also we get combined some work on, instead of like the get return value, but having like composability. So like the smart contracts can build on top of each other. That's another feature that I personally would be looking forward to more than potentially some state improvements. But, as I said, you can never please everybody.
Yeah, the ability to compose things up, that's another area that, we're looking at. I'm also kind of excited about that. The new read-only transaction capability is a bit of that. I know you're actually talking about something a little different there, but the read-only transaction does allow you to like provide a query capability that allows you to compose across various tables and get that into a form that's maybe more easily accessible. And those, currently even, in 4.0 allow you to run those in parallel, which is a nice little added benefit as well.
For sure. And when get action or like get return value, when you're returning a value, you now, like a lot of the times they're going to need a backend. You can just like clearly have some logic there that will, give you the metrics you need. And as long as you don't need history, you're having the chain do that for you, and you're able to process that like in parallel. It's beautiful.
Yeah, any feedback there that you guys hear about or run into yourselves in terms of the new read-only transaction capability? We'd love to hear as well. We think that provides some very useful functionality that people will find beneficial, but certainly any feedback there is more than welcome.
Oh, just for your eyes alone, it's like a lifesaver. Instead of making like 4 or 5 calls and waiting on them and dependent on other things that you don't know that might have changed, you're now getting it done within execution, within the smart contract itself. And really your eyes can provide a much more smoother user experience without relying on, backends. And then, of course, you add that with hosting on IPFS, and you can have like some unstoppable solutions, and opens other doors that like I probably didn't even think of yet.
All right. Well, there are 5 minutes remaining to try and capture any other topics of interest. Right now, I've got state management optimizations, multi-threaded transaction execution, composability. Are there others?
Devin, do you ever find wire node peer-to-peer mirror the traffic in and out? They're crushing it. I sent 3 gigs out in a minute the other day.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Was the feedback there that was not true in 4.0 and it is in 3.2? I didn't actually go and track that down, but
I haven't tested that fully on 4.0. I didn't know that was a potential.
I think that's what Matthew Darwin indicated, was that he's not seeing that on 4.0, but that he was in 3. But I'm not sure if that was exactly what he was saying or not. But if we can get that feedback, that'd be great. Otherwise, because I know we did make some changes in that arena in 4.0 in terms of the way that's done. And so, yeah, I could definitely see that being addressed as kind of an artifact of doing some other work that we were doing there. But yeah, let me take a look at that. I kind of had set that aside and hadn't got back to it. But yeah, let me take a look and see if anything jumps out at me. Because you're right, it should not be the case.
Yeah, and by sound 3, it definitely in mirroring and massive amounts. And I'm like, why would somebody be sending me 2 gigs worth of inbound peer-to-peer and it not be nefarious? I think it's just the response of me sending it out to them.
I think so. The most likely thing there is that it's echoing the block back to you, which obviously it shouldn't do. But yeah, let me see if I can verify that, if that's the case.
I'll try to see if 4.0 stacks do the same. I'll throw it on the publics.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you give me that feedback, that'd be helpful. That would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So one last call, Brian.
Yeah. But a lot of last calls. This is the 3rd last call. All right, I'll hand it back to Daniel to close us out.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Have an awesome day and get your Pomelo applications in. Applications open today too. So, little shameless plug. Awesome day, everybody. Take care.